Well, I have several names. And when I became a Buddhist nun, which is an effort to lose yourself and reach Nibbana, instead of getting less names, I got more. So let's start. So U Ba Khin came to Europe, and my father was the German contact who looked after the whole group. And he was very much impressed about this strange person from the East. He came home to us and said, "This is one of the miracles of the East." High-ranking government officer who is also a saint. I got to know meditation after a few months in Burma. And we were supposed to be there 6 months. It became 3.5 years, but I stayed more than 10 years. I went home to Germany only for 6 months, very, very late. It changed my life. I must say, our first acquaintance with Burma as a country, it was simply wonderful and exciting.
May all beings be happy, and may peace prevail in the world.
So welcome everybody. I'm really excited to be here with my friend Joa to talk about the life of Friedgard Lottermoser. Joa's asked me to introduce this series of interviews and to help launch these conversations. And so Joa, I just want to thank you for having the foresight and taking the initiative to gather the life stories of Friedgard Lottermoser, who's also known as Anmar Khin by her Burmese friends or by her ordination name, Samaneri Akinchana. I met Friedgard about 20 years ago at Dhammagiri and had the good fortune to be a neighbor of hers for about a month or so in the residential quarters at the center. And she was such an intriguing storyteller with a formidable memory for detail. I'll never forget that. I felt so privileged for all the stories that she shared. And these interviews that Joa has just conducted goes into such great detail and has really helped me relive so many of the old stories of her life and of U Ba Khin. So I'm very, very fortunate and privileged to be here with Joa and to have listened to these interviews. And so these interviews and other projects that will likely emerge from them will not only provide us with a biography of this extraordinary character so deeply steeped in the Dhamma, but will also offer us a unique and fuller picture of the meditation master, Sayagyi U Ba Khin, and his foremost disciples who practiced with him at the International Meditation Center in Yangon during the 1950s and 60s. Sayagyi and his disciples, as most of the listeners here will know, have shaped the lives of millions of people today. The timing of these interviews with Friedgard is remarkable, as she passed away just a few months after they were completed. And I remember, Joa, you had shared with me her last message that she wrote to a group of Burmese friends, where she wrote, "I was happy in Burma and it changed my life." We are so fortunate that Friedgard trusted you, Joa, with her life-changing stories in Burma, some of which we'll hear about in this first episode. So I just want to acknowledge that it's a real honor and privilege for me to be here with you today to launch this project detailing Friedgard's reflections on history, culture, authoritarianism, civil disobedience, and Vipassana meditation in modern Burma. Before we listen to this first interview, Joa, can you please help set the stage for what we're about to hear? Maybe just to begin, can you tell us a little bit about who she was and how you got involved with her?
Well, thank you, Corey, for hosting this episode and having me on as a guest in this case. And thank you for that incredible introduction. I got goosebumps, and I'm a bit emotional in how you've referenced her last words, and I'm getting a little bit choked up now because I was also happy in Burma, and it also changed my life, and hers is quite a story to tell, and I was really honored to play some small part in being able to get that story on record and to be able to hear from her and now take the first step in bringing that story to the world. At this point, at Insight Myanmar podcast, we've had well over 300 guests. We have something like 16 days of continuous interviews if you listen to all of it, and yet nothing holds a candle to Friedgard. I tell people she was always something of my Moby Dick, something that I strove to want to hear from her. I first met Friedgard in 2016 when I was working on the Meditator's Guide for Burma, and I had managed to, through some extraordinary difficulty, be able to make contact with her because she was a very remote and hard person to be able to get in touch with. And we had, as I remember, 8 hours of conversations. I think one 6-hour conversation, one 2-hour conversation before I had the podcast. And as I took notes from those conversations, those notes changed my life. Hearing what she had to say blew my mind in every respect. And I didn't record it. It was before the podcast program, but writing it down was remarkable. And from the day I got the podcast platform in 2019, she was the guest I wanted to have on. And I strove for years to again make contact with her, which as a remote nun seeking liberation was hard to do. And it's not an exaggeration to say that I literally was sometimes in a kind of pain that with the thought that she might one day leave this world without her story being known in full beyond what I had heard in those 8 hours, and was driven to want to find some way to speak to her with her comfort level. Of course, with the nature and philosophy of our platform is that people speak with their own agency and their own comfort level. There's no pushing, there's no gotcha moments, there's no deadlines. Whatever conditions the guest sets, we abide by. But I didn't want this remarkable woman to leave the world without her store of knowledge and experience being lost forever. And I would sometimes actually have pain, physical pain, thinking that this could happen one day. And amazingly, I was able to finally make contact with her last year again. And she agreed immediately to do this series of interviews and realized that she had come across extraordinary figures at really remarkable times, and that her discussion and her exquisite memory of what she had lived through was knowledge that wasn't contained in the world, and that she felt a responsibility, a cautious responsibility, because with knowledge also comes danger, also comes a way of misunderstanding or disrupting knowledge. And so she was always very, very cautious and careful in what she told and how she told it. But she also realized there was a place for this knowledge, and she came to trust me as a conversation partner in being able to share this knowledge and have it respected and maintained. In total, we recorded, I believe it's 25 hours of remote conversations and 10 hours of video conversations in Sri Lanka in March of this year. And all of these conversations were recorded with the condition that Friedgard said. There was only one condition, and that was that none of this material could be published during her lifetime. And the reason for that is, as you'll hear in these interviews, she was a student of Sayagyi U Ba Khin, and in 1995 began to take courses under SN Goenka and took long courses, and came to feel that the long courses offered by SN Goenka were the closest equivalent to the meditation environment and practice. While not identical, the technique and the environment was the nearest similarity to what U Ba Khin taught as anything in the world, and was tremendously grateful that these centers and courses existed. And she knew that she was in the latter years of her life, and as mentioned, was striving for a better rebirth, or at minimum, and hopefully some attainment or full liberation. And these long courses presented her best chance of being able to reach these goals, and was concerned that her very honest recollections of certain parts of her early meditation journey under Sayagyi U Ba Khin, that certain things that she had witnessed or that she remembered or that she told would clash with the Goenka narrative and organization, and that she would be banned from doing further long courses. And so the reason that these talks were held in the sort of confidentiality that she requested, and as mentioned on this platform with our work in Burma, we deal regularly with certain levels of confidentiality, sometimes life or death situations and political matters, individuals that have any number of conditions in order to talk to us. And we always abide by those, no matter what they are, no matter if we, to what level we might understand them, we abide by them out of respect to the guest. And her condition was that in order to ensure that she was able to continue sitting long courses and not be on the record of saying something through her memory that would clash with or disrupt this narrative, she wanted these conversations held in strict confidentiality until she passed, which I was fine with. At this point, I was simply a conversation partner, and whether these conversations would eventually get out in 5 years or 10 years, hopefully as long as possible, I was in no rush to want to share them. I just felt enormous privilege in being able to sit across from her and hear them, and know that every new minute of dialogue that was recorded was another minute from her extraordinary life and experience and memory that was preserved. And I hope that we would have many more of these hours. And so the conversations went on like this. And you referenced how I was fortunate to have this project completed just in the short time before she sadly passed away. I am very fortunate that we got as many hours as we did. I wouldn't go so far to say that the project was completed. We had talks and plans of meeting regularly in Sri Lanka, continuing the remote recordings, and even in 35 hours of conversations, there were major parts of her life that we barely touched upon that were quite important. It's just a testament to how really unbelievably rich and full this life was. But we have what we have. And I feel so fortunate to have that, as listeners will begin with the 90 minutes that follow here. And it's a transition for me in going from being a conversation partner, where my only role was to ask questions and to prompt and to explore, to listen, think, and reflect, and now finding myself in this role of storyteller, where I'm now transitioning to taking what she said and wanting to share it with the world. And this has taken some time. This is why we started in the first place, and I'm so amazed, really, that these conversations that our small group has been holding and cherishing for these months, that then now be something public for everyone. That's extraordinary. But it's also something of an emotional transition in going from simply appreciating how wonderful these talks were to realizing this role, and now trying to do my best and play my part in sharing it to this wider world, and doing right by what was said and what was learned and bringing it out.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Joa. That's really fascinating. And yes, you're right. The interviews were not complete. They're far from complete. I think we got a lot of great material around her meditation practice and the tradition. But yeah, there was obviously lots of elements of her life that were left out. And especially, she did have a role in helping reinstate the Bhikkhuni Sangha, although she herself never went beyond a seminary. I believe she did have a role in that movement. And I know that was something that you were hoping to capture. And hopefully there's enough people who are in her life, who are very close with her, who you'll be able to interview to get a broader picture of who this fantastic person was. Do you think you could just provide us a little bit of a general overview of who Friedgard was? Can you just tell us a little bit more about her life, so that will help us really help the listeners really have some context in which to locate these interviews?
Yeah, so Friedgard was born in Nazi Germany, and sometime after the war ended, obviously growing up in a country that was really devastated by the war, and her father died soon after. Her mother remarried. She had a stepfather, and her stepfather, when Friedgard was a girl, had some position where he became the European contact for a Burmese delegation, a Burmese state delegation that visited looking at government business in Europe. And he was in charge of organizing their trip. One member of this delegation was the government minister, Sayagyi U Ba Khin, in the new administration. And therein a friendship was formed, a very close friendship was formed by her stepfather organizing the only time that U Ba Khin ever left Burma. And so when he was looking for a new job, when Friedgard was 17, he ended up accepting employment at the Fritz Werner Corporation in Rangoon, as it was at the time, and they lived on the military compound. Fritz Werner was involved in making weapons, but also in many other types of goods as well, as she explains in this very episode. When she was 17 years old, she visited Sayagyi U Ba Khin's center, International Meditation Center, and her U Ba Khin was desperately trying to recruit her stepfather to sit a course, as they were very close friends, and to no avail at the end. Stepfather never joined, but Friedgard did. And she fell in love with the practice and ended up, as we know, dedicating her life to her master, Sayagyi U Ba Khin, and learning under him, and through this association, learning about Burmese Buddhism and Burma itself and the Burmese language. And so she lived in Burma from 1959 to 1972. One must remember that Ne Win launched a coup in 1962. And so it was extremely unusual for foreigners, especially Westerners, to be in Burma after 1962. And indeed, her whole family left and she stayed behind. How she managed to stay is quite a story, which she'll get into. And it's another testament of her resilience, stubbornness in a way, determination, to just keep knocking on doors until they open. And that's how she ended up with the life that she had. In this time, she learned Burmese language. She studied Burmese scholarship. She got degrees in Rangoon University and Mandalay University. And she not only continued her tutelage under Sayagyi U Ba Khin and spending what would amount to years at IMC. I think it's actually an open question to compare the time that she spent at IMC and SN Goenka himself. She certainly spent quite a long time at the center, as you start to realize the story she's telling. At one point sitting 100 days when the coup happened. partly out of safety and partly to practice. But she also became close to Webu Sayadaw and to Mahagandhiyon Sayadaw, other extraordinary figures in Myanmar that very few foreigners have had contact with. She then left Burma in 1971 and at that time believed that she would never really properly meditate again, because this was a time in the world when if you wanted to practice Vipassana meditation, it was really rooted to geographical destinations, to physical places. It's hard to imagine that today. But as she left Burma, the worldwide mindfulness movement was just taking off. Of course, Goenka, but also many of the other U Ba Khin teachers, Robert Hover and Ruth Denison and John Coleman, among others. And so she was at the ground floor of this Vipassana meditation movement when no one really knew what they were doing, but everyone was trying and traveling around trying to help these courses get off the ground, having correspondence, letters with these emerging teachers. And as someone who had spent so much time in Burmese environments, not just brief touches or even extended touches, but really years and decades of life, she was able to impart her knowledge of these Burmese Buddhist sites and meditation to help foster this growing mindfulness movement. So she was at the ground floor of what has now become an industry and a vocation and something that has really changed Western society in our lives. She was at the start of that. And then, of course, there's her scholarship. She became a bona fide scholar in her own right and wrote extensively about, in Burmese, the Vipassana, and beyond that, also, as you say, in promoting the Bhikkhuni order and gender equality in the Sangha. Sadly, these two topics are not topics we had the time in our 35 hours to go into in the kind of depth that I would have liked. These were both next on the discussion list to be able to understand what she did in these fields. And that's something that we will, as you say, have to go to other people to learn about. And then when the 2021 coup happened in Myanmar, she was fervently on the side of the revolution. And in no uncertain terms, was a fierce advocate for Burmese freedom at all costs. Someone who had come out of Nazi Germany, who had nearly been killed. And as she'll tell in one story, the 1962 Ne Win coup had seen countless friends and colleagues and monks and nuns whose lives were lost in some way to the stupidity, as she calls it, the stupid brutality of these Burmese regimes over the years. She also saw this worldly battle of tyranny and freedom and was very, very socially engaged on the side of freedom in spite of all of this. And so there's these extraordinary themes of scholarship, of gender equality in the Sangha, of the mindfulness revolution kicking off, this freedom versus tyranny. And then there was her experience in Burma. And when I try to tell someone what this story was in a snapshot, I usually say, do you know the book and the movie 7 Years in Tibet? This is kind of like the Burmese version of 7 Years in Tibet. It's 11 years, 12, 13 years, whatever it is in Burma. But the part of her life where she's this young Western girl all by herself, no family after the coup has left, in these environments that no Westerner ever set foot in, that she's living in for years upon years, with masters who had never met another Westerner, having mastered the language and immersed herself in the meditation. And yet, despite some of these topics of Burma, the political history of Burma, of the growth of the mindfulness movement, of the Goenka tradition, of gender equality, etc., in the Sangha, etc., despite these themes, which are so important to societies and communities and to scholars, Friedgard is virtually an unknown person, and yet she has this tremendous memory of a life that you couldn't dream up that was lived, and somehow is unknown to everyone, to scholarship, to the Goenka tradition, to those who have cared about Burma and who have studied Burma, is a virtual unknown in every sector. And so this is, you hear me getting a little worked up about my affection and my my feeling coming out for her here, but this is as brief as I can go and giving a bit of a snapshot.
Thanks, Joa. That was excellent. That was a great background to her life, and she, as you said, she really did have this tremendous memory, and so everything that you just outlined will be able to hear directly from here in your conversations with her. The listener, it'll be impossible for the listener not to recognize her vivid descriptions of the homes she stayed in, or the food she ate, the people she encountered at university or in elite social settings or at the meditation centers, with Burmese military officials, the expat community. Her ability to recount the smallest of details is truly wonderful, and we're really lucky to have this. So I think now, should we listen to the first episode?
Let's do it.
Well, I have several names. And when I became a Buddhist nun, which is an effort to lose yourself and reach Nibbana, instead of getting less names, I got more. So let's start. The name with which I was born is Friedgard Lottermoser. Heinz Lottermoser was my father, and I was born in 1942 in Germany, in Berlin. And my name would have been a boy, and names of Helmut, but since I was a girl, my parents had to look for a name in a hurry. It was in the middle of World War II, so they wanted a rare name and one connected with peace. So they choose Friedgard, because Frieden and Garden, that is a fenced area in which peace rules in the middle of World War II. So I have been Friedgard Lottermoser. I still am. It's still my passport name. But when I came to Burma at the age of 17 and a half in 1959, the Burmese couldn't pronounce these names. And so they gave me a Burmese name, and that is U Ba Khin, a Burmese name. And then I went to a monastery, and the monk said, Khin is not a layman, a name. You should call yourself Oma. That is a nun's name. And then many years later, in 2008, I really became a nun with a robe and with an ordination as a seminary, and I chose this name Akinchana, because Akinchana means nothing, having nothing, not clinging to anything. So as far as names, that is me.
Well, thank you for introducing yourself, and by whatever name you go by and we call you, it is an absolute honor and privilege to have you on here. In the many years since we've had a podcast platform, having the privilege to talk to you was at the very top of the list. We talked for many hours before I had a podcast. The conversation was not recorded. I took notes, and that went into a guidebook that I was writing for meditators coming to the country during the transition period. And myself and the small team I was working with were just so educated and inspired by what you were saying, and a drive to want to bring your story to more people. And so it's been a long journey. Here we are now for the start of what I hope is a series of conversations. And I'm just humbled and overjoyed that we have the chance to talk and to be able to bring your voice directly, unadulterated, to our listeners, who will also be able to learn from your voice and your stories. So let's start with that right away. You have a lot to share, but let's start with, as you say, 17 and a half years old, 1959, you went with your family to live in Rangoon, as it was called then. So can you take us there and describe what brought your family to Rangoon, what your initial impressions were, what your life was like, and those and just what it was like living in Rangoon in those days?
Well, I was born during the war. I born in Berlin, but I spent my early childhood in East Germany because that is my grandmother's home. And when I was 10 years old, so I was separated from both my parents from the age to 5 to 10, staying with the grandmother. And then I was taken to West Germany. And there was only my mother and my 4 sisters. My father was no longer there. And then my mother married again when I was 15. And when we went to Burma, she was married already for 2 years, but she didn't have a home to live together with her new husband because he was an engineer and his work had to be in big cities like Berlin or Frankfurt because he was doing international engineering. And my mother was a medical doctor and she had to stay in the town where her patients were. So they tried various things to get together as a family in the same place. And that means my stepfather was looking for a new job, trying to get a salary that is high enough to support his wife and his newly acquired daughters. And so he got in touch with a firm and that had business with Burma. And during the trial period, he was given the task to look after a Burmese government delegation that came to Germany. And in this government delegation, there was U Ba Khin. So U Ba Khin came to Europe, and my father was the German contact who looked after the whole group. And he was very much impressed about this strange person from the East. He came home to us and said, "This is one of the miracles of the East. A high-ranking government officer who is also a saint." And then he was successful, and the firm employed him. And the first thing he was given is he was asked to go to Burma. So since it was an opportunity, he took the 3 younger children and my mother, but the 2 older ones, they were already university students. So we came to Burma as a family of 5. Father, mother, and 3 daughters. But the people didn't know that our Proto Kerner is not our real father, only our stepfather. They were called us by his name. And at that time, in 1959, that was continuing to Germany. It was an absolute miracle. I was in school, I was in 12th standard. The school had more than 1,000 pupils, and not one of them had been outside Europe. We were the only first ones. So we were full of expectations. And then we took a ship from Germany, a train to Italy, and in Genoa, in Italy, we took a ship through the Suez Canal to Bombay at that time. Now it's called Mumbai. And then we stayed a few days there with Germans who worked for Siemens. And then we took a plane to Yangon, at that time Rangoon in Burma. It was in the middle of October, at the beginning of November. The ship took 2 weeks. And then I thought, this Orient, 1001 Nights, colorful things, nice flowers. And when we come to stay in Burma, I looked outside and there were some trees full of dust, no flowers at all, because it was the wrong season. And then we were given a house, but that was not quite ready because the previous person who worked for this firm had been a bachelor and his family consisted of his dog. So now there came a family man with 5 people in the family, and he had to create the rooms in which we were to live, and they were just a little late. So we stayed with some Germans who gave us a bed to sleep and so on. And then we lived in this beautiful old Chinese palace that was built by Englishmen during the colonial days. The ground floor was brick. The upstairs was a tower with 3 stories made of wood with stairs. And we had one neighbor who was an army man with his family. And it was on the shores of Lake Inya in Rangoon, on a peninsula. It was a military compound, but the military was quite far away. And it was just on the lake. It had a boathouse. We could use the boat. So my father's term was originally half a year. It was extended to 3 years, and he stayed in Burma for 3.5 years together with my younger sisters and my mother. And my elder sisters also came to visit for shorter periods. But I got to know meditation after a few months in Burma. And it was simply through the fact that my stepfather met U Ba Khin in Germany, which led to our arrival in Rangoon. And we were supposed to be there 6 months. It became 3.5 years, but I stayed more than 10 years. I went home to Germany only for 6 months, very, very late. It changed my life, really.
That's that's a great opening introduction to set the stage and understand the context of what brought you there and your initial life. Definitely want to go into more your meditation and your relationship with some of these great meditation teachers and figures that you would spend time with along the way. Before we get there, I wonder if you could just paint a picture of Rangoon at the time, in Burma as it was known then, in general. As you arrived in 59, you would stay for 10 years. These were very pivotal and tumultuous years after in the post-independence era, and a lot of infighting, the parliamentary democracy period as it's known, leading to the coup. There were a lot of things going on, Cold War as well, but just from the point of view of a teenager as you were at the time and someone in their early 20s, can you describe what it was like living and being as an expatriate in the country, in the city at that time?
Okay. My stepfather had been to Pakistan twice as an engineer before he married my mother. And so he had shown, taking pictures, he visited us, he showed us these pictures, he bought carpets from Pakistan and all that. And he had a certain experience on how to live in Asia. So he taught us what to expect in Rangoon. But of course, there's a big difference between Pakistan and Burma. And we, my younger sister and me, we were just full of expectations and we knew nothing. But we just thought it was a great chance. And my experience is that I was there for 2 weeks looking, and I wasn't quite sure whether I was there or not. It was like a dream, but it was not at all what I expected, and it was silent. The whole environment. Of course, normal life going on, but the general air, compared to Germany. And then after 2 weeks, suddenly I opened my eyes. I said, oh, wonderful, wonderful, interesting. And the thing is, we were asked to go to university. And I was in 11th, I was in 12th standard. That is very close to high school final in Germany, which is after 13 degrees. But the university was actually not quite fitted because the Burmese used the British system. So we were allowed at the university, but I lost some of the things. And it was at the end of the academic year. So the first experience was that I went to this university for pre-medical, and it was science, which was my weak subject because I was a very good student. And so I thought, I'm weak in science, I should learn that. So I will remove that weakness. But I went there and it was all in English, and it was physics, mathematics, chemistry, biology for pre-medical, compulsory English, and compulsory Burmese. We got an exception because we didn't know any Burmese, my sister and me. So my sister went there for 1 week. Then she said, I want to go home to Germany. I can't understand what the teacher says. She's 2 years younger. Now, I didn't say I can't understand what the teacher says. I tried because my English was somewhat better. But I went there for 2 months. And particularly, I remember how we went into the laboratory for the chemistry. We had to do titration, mixing eine Säure, an acid, with a base, and it is a salt. Or you take the salt and then you add it, and you have to weigh it and all that. We did that every day, but I didn't really understand what I was doing there. And so after then, there was a period of private study, so I tried very hard. I cut up one frog that was in botany. And when I cut the frog, I found that he was not dead. His heart was still beating. But anyhow, that's the only time I dissected any animal that was not quite dead. So then I passed, I sat for the examination, and I failed in all subjects except English and botany. That was a devastating experience for me. So I was glad it was finished. And then I started to learn Burmese. At first, I learned from our drivers. We had several cars given by the military because we lived in the military compound. And it was very far to walk even to the main road, which is Kabae Pagoda Road in Rangoon. So we had these cars, and we had to, in the morning, we had to discuss with our stepfather what we had to do and who would take which car. So I learned the Burmese from the servants first, and then I discovered that there is a free class Burmese instruction at the Ramakrishna mission in central Rangoon. So I went there, and we learned the letters. I remember the first letters; they were all circles. But during that time, I was getting very interested in this country, but not so much about Buddhism, but just the country itself. Yeah, but then it was my long holiday, and I had failed, so I was sort of not very happy. But so I enjoyed my holidays very much, and I wanted to do something that would make me feel good. And then while I went to this class at Ramakrishna Mission in the month of March, I saw the Shwedakum Pagoda on the way back. It was getting dark. And then I remember that when we first came, oh yes, I have forgotten that U Ba Khin invited us to visit his center soon after our arrival, even before we moved into our own quarters. That means it was the full moon of November, the light festival, the Zaundine Light Festival. And we visited the center in the evening, and I thought it was a party, because my parents received a printed invitation on which was written to Dr. Körner and Mrs. Körner and family, invited on the occasion of the Full Moon Light Festival and so on, to Inyamyang 31A International Meditation Center. I thought it was a party, so I dressed my party dress and my high heel shoes, which I had just recently got, and I couldn't walk in it properly. And we went to the meditation center, which had a garden, and I had to climb the stairs and all that. And at that occasion, that was in November, on that occasion, my parents promised they would take the course, but my mother said, I have to learn more English. She was very weak in English. And so then afterwards we got settled in Rangoon. We forgot about it. And then in March, after this disappointing experience at the university, I remembered it. And I said, oh, should have gone full moon meditation course. And then I realized that because they had told me when the courses are the first Friday in every month. And then I realized the beginning of March, and today is Thursday. So tomorrow is Friday and the meditation starts. So while I was in the car, I asked the driver, Mao Shui, do you remember where we went when we were new here? We went to this meditation center. Do you know where it is? And he said, yes. So then I said, can you find it? I want to go there before you take me home. So we were at a Kokan Road, that is about Bahan, no? And then he went to the Inyamyang through these lanes. At that time, I didn't know how to go, but the driver knew. So then I came there, and I walked up. I was by myself. And walking up, it was already dark, but not early in the evening. And so I came and saw two people sitting there, two ladies, and I said, well, is it the meditation course starting tomorrow? Yes, I want to come. And then they looked at me and they said, yes. Oh, yes, you can come. But are you coming alone? I said, yes, can I not come alone? And then they said, well, you better ask at home whether someone else from the family comes along with you. Apparently, they thought I was quite young to come there by myself alone, which, of course, I didn't think I was very young, like teenagers are. And so I finished this tomorrow. We start the meditation course. I went down. The driver took me home, and people were sitting at the supper in our house with the tower on top, And so I said, oh, yes, well, I've been to this meditation center, and tomorrow the meditation is starting, and I want to go. And they asked me to please request you whether any one of you wants to come along. And then my father said, well, tomorrow I have to work. And my younger sisters didn't know anything about it because they hadn't been on this invitation. My parents took away only me. And then my mother said, well, we promised it. And I think my English is still not very good, but it won't get any much better because I'm already here several months. So my mother decided she would come. And next morning we went in a hurry, quite unprepared. And we started with the meditation. Yeah. But I must say, our first acquaintance with Burma as a country, it was simply wonderful and exciting. And of course, there were many foreigners there, and my father had his previous acquaintance with the Indian, Pakistani stuff. So, and in his business, he had to do with foreigners and with Burmese, and his firm cooperated with the military. That is why we were given quarters in the military compound. It was, in fact, very close to weapons factory number 1, which is off Kabai. It is in the vicinity of what is nowadays the Inya Lake Hotel. At that time, the Inya Lake Hotel was being built, and we called it the Russian Gift Hotel because it's gifted by Russian. But for the Germans, of course, it was a secret joke because gift in German means poison. So if the German says Russian Gift Hotel, it means in German Russian Poison Hotel. But when it was finished, it was named Inya Lake Hotel. Yes. So, and I had then, by the time I went to meditation, I had the experience of attending the pre-medical college, which is in Yankin. It's a suburb of Rangoon. At that time, off Pagoda Road, there were some buildings which were the living quarters, self-memories for an institution called UBRI, Union of Burma Research. Well, they were doing some scientific research there. No? And later, when I continued with my Burmese studies, one of the young men who was employed there had a German wife, and my father engaged him to give me private tuition in Burmese language for quite a while after paying him. And they sent him a car, he came to our house, and every morning we had 1 hour of Burmese. So we even visited these UBRI facilities, and they permitted us to paint some pots with which they were experimenting, clay flower pots. And I know I painted one with a Friedegard pagoda, and my sister also came along, and they were given to us as gifts. And they were researching on how to use rice bran in a better way for its nutritious content and whatever. Yeah. So it took me several years to enter into the understanding the Burmese. And I had the feeling for several years, at least 3 years, that I was peeling like an onion. Taking out one layer, what is below that? Taking out another layer, what is below that? For several years. Until I get the feeling that I know more or less what the Burmese society is like. And I could observe that my family members did not have this experience because they didn't mix with the Burmese to the same extent as I did. My younger sister went to the international school, so all her classmates were mostly not Burmese. They were other foreigners whose parents worked in Rangoon. My father was in his business world, and his business world they were either army officers or rich people. And at that time, the rich people in Rangoon were mostly Chinese or Indian. There are not many Burmese. And my mother, she was at home, of course, and she did the shopping. She looked after the household. But then later, since she is a medical doctor, she found a hospital where she could work free of charge. So then she started to go there a few days every week. And she started to learn Burmese, like what she has to ask the patient: do you have fever? Do you have stomachache? And so on. I had to teach her by that time. It was after we were there 1 year. But the main thing that it was such a quiet society. You know, when you see the girls walking on the road, they would be gentle, they would be pretty, they would wear flowers in their hair. And particularly at the university, they had all very nice earrings and jewelry, necklace, and so on. And I looked at the faces. I couldn't distinguish the faces. I didn't know who it is. I had to memorize the earrings. The girl wearing such and such earring, that is so and so. Because I wasn't used to the type of face. But I went along well. I invited 2 of the university students to our house, even when I was still at this pre-medical facility. But meditation made a big change to me, because I did well in the meditation and they encouraged me. And then I went repeatedly. And they were all Burmese. I was the only foreigner there. Of course, the first course I was together with my mother. But in the first meditation course, even on the first day, I had been the day before and on Thursday. And then when we came on Friday, we were given the house in which there were 2 people before, which later I discovered it is actually the house in which sometimes U Ba Khin rested during lunchtime, and where Mother Sama used to live with her companion on the female side. And was the only house that had an attached bathroom. And they had emptied that because they had 2 foreign meditators. And there was 2 beds with mosquito net, and there was a table and chairs for us to eat there. And when we had our first meal during the first meditation course, I looked around and I saw there are some more houses in which also women live who meditate. And one of these houses had a roof made of leaves. So I looked at these leaves. Oh, I said, can I not stay in that house which has a roof of leaves? And I said it, and then they talked a little bit about it, and then they said, "Well, do you want to stay with your mother? Ask your mother." And my mother said, "No, this is a nice house. I don't want to stay in that other house." So my mother stayed alone in this comfortable house with an attached bathroom. And I went into that house, which actually they were sleeping on the floor, and it was meant for many people, but actually it was empty at the time because there was 2. The other one, there were meditating women in this. This one was the leaf roof. It was the lesser one. The other had corrugated iron roof. And I was alone there. And just because I wanted to leave there, they called another teenager who had already meditated to keep me company, so I wouldn't be sleeping there alone. And then on the same day, but a little later, there came a lady who attended the first meditation course. It was also her first course. I think it was, yes. And she had a servant with her. And she was a film actress and a society lady. Anyhow, I had my camping experience in the house with the roofed leaf, with the leaves on. And my mother had her thing, but of course we met, and there was no formal teaching during the meditation course. We given the schedule: start meditation 5 o'clock, and then so on. Get up, light time, lunchtime, breakfast time, lunchtime, rest time. Then in the evening, there was a break, but the teaching was simply by talking to the teacher and asking questions for these 2 foreigners, my mother and me. And that's the normal format. When U Ba Khin taught foreigners, he didn't have many together. And if there were many, then it would be husband and wife or Hitler, for instance, they're in a group of C, including the sister-in-law, and so on. Not more than that. So the Burmese came in a group. So when I knew the center better, then, and U Ba Khin was also busy after I had taken many, many courses, I learned Burmese actually to understand what U Ba Khin was teaching to the others when he was not speaking specifically to me. But what I remember about the general Burmese Rangoon environment is particularly we have my parents used to take a lot of photographs, and there were so many Indians, different types. These Ismaili Muslims who the women wear two skirts, and one skirt they put over their head. No, not like this sari. They were all there. But when the military seized power, then they had an anti-foreign policy. So gradually, these people disappeared. But it was only in '62 that the Nevin took power. So by that time, it was in March '62. So by that time, I had been in Burma already 2 years and a half. So it's not my first experience. And when we came, I think the caretaker government was still in place. And then there were elections, and UNU won them. We were in Rangoon during that time. And so when UNU reigned between these elections, I think they must have been in 1960. Yeah. And then before Nevin took the power, that was the time, the last democratically elected government of Burma. And I was already at the university. And then my elder sisters had also come. So my eldest sister, she worked one year at RGH, Rangoon General Hospital, volunteering as a nurse. That was beneficial to her education. She had finished her training, but this was a practical thing she could use before earning money in Germany. And she enjoyed it immensely. She was very happy in Burma. She was determined to come back. And she got friends with some doctors at the university, which she invited at the hospital, that she invited to our home for social occasions, and we played with them. We did sketches and we did songs and all sorts. I think we even had a party. Then we could swim because it was near the lake. And so one of the doctors she was friendly with was a Shan. So he had other Shan friends. So there were actually two Shans that came often to our house. And when I was at the university, later when I stayed in the hospital, I got to know some Shan women, female students. And if you know one Shan, you get to know lots. And so I also got to know Karens at the university, because the Karens mostly were better in English. So I could speak to them more easily. My first three friends at the university, that was in BOC College in Tidan, the intermediate number 1, which I joined then in June 1960, after I had already done several meditation courses. And the first one, it was a Karen, an Anglo-Burmese, and a Chinese woman. 3 student friends. They were the first ones that I met regularly at the university. And then later, little, I found out if I want to improve my Burmese. And in the Pali class, I took Pali because I wanted, after meditation, I didn't want any science anymore. I wanted to know mostly about Burmese culture. But I didn't know the language. I only could speak a few words and a few sentences. So I couldn't take compulsory Burmese. But they had offered in the field of Burmese culture, they could either take Burmese language or Pali in Burmese or Buddhism in Burmese. So I was at a loss because I can't teach the subject follow the subject that I taught in Burmese. And I found out that they had the possibility to teach Pali also in English. So I said, can I take Pali in English? And then because of that, they installed the English section for teaching Pali in English. I was the only student. And in the Burmese, and in the Burmese section, there were about 40 students. Mm-hmm. So after I had a few lessons, there was a boy from the Burmese section switching to the English section. So then we were two of us there for several years. I think he was only coming because there was a foreign woman and he was interested in this girl. Anyhow, the interest was not mutual, so we sat side by side and studied Pali. But in the case of Buddhism, they didn't have a teacher, so I couldn't take Buddhism, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And so then being at the university, I found out if I want to improve my Burmese, I had this private class. In the Ramakrishna mission, I didn't learn much. It was free, but they taught very little. There are lots of Indians living there, but the teacher didn't really, you didn't learn very much. So later I went to the Burma America Institute in Rangoon. That had a good facility for learning Burmese, and they had a textbook, which at that time, later it was revised and published. It was written by an American scholar who, by the name of Cornyn, W. Cornyn, Cornyn, and it was typed cyclostyle, with wax matrices and made into a book. Later it was printed. But that was a real good book for speaking Burmese. It used transcription, and the letters were not used, but it gave me good material and also explanation of the grammar. Yeah. Okay, but then privately at the university, I got to friends who were not so good in English, so I had to speak them mixed Burmese English by and by. I improved in this way. Yeah, but that is why then, when the military seized power in 1962, I was already a university student at a university hostel, and that was simply because I wanted to leave my family. Because, after a while, the meditation said it was shown that the meditation and living in the military environment didn't really match very well. Because it's so close to this, and the soldiers used to come to our house also. But I must say the soldiers that I met in our home, which were connected with the business my father did, most of them were captains who were in some way connected with this number one factory. They were quite different from what I hear about the military nowadays. I remember that they were invited then, and they were offered drinks. And of course, my stepfather didn't drink much. He had a beer once in a while for lunch. And he said in the tropics, he followed the good English colonial habit, alcohol only after sunset. So, but he had, of course, to offer. And so when the Burmese soldiers came, some of them took alcohol, but many of them asked for a soft drink. I have told this to young people nowadays in Burma. They don't believe me, but it's true. It's true. And so when my stepfather, before he went to Burma, he said, of course, we deal with the military, but this military, they have already a weapons factory. Now they want to produce civilian goods. And they had to build this number one weapons factory, in which Fritz Werner was also concerned. And then they had built BPI, and BPI is just a pharmaceutical institute which makes medical things, and it's still existing. It's very successful. But they were finished, and when my stepfather came, they had a project opposite Prom, which is now Pie, at a place called Sinthe. Well, we called it, of course, Sinde, because we didn't know, but in Burmese language it means dead elephant, Sin, elephant, they die. And it is mentioned in the Glass Palace Chronicle, because there is an old Burmese legend that the king chased an elephant, which was very dangerous, and then he finally killed it at that place. And quite close to it, there's also a big pagoda on the mountaintop, which, of course, we saw at that time. But when we went there, it was like the dunes. It was on the edge of the Irrawaddy River, but so much sand. It was just sand and this large pagoda, and I didn't know it was a historical pagoda at that time. It's not a pagoda, it's a Buddha image, standing image. And it was established by the famous king Sin Pyu-shin. Sin Pyu-shin, that is the third monarch of the Goenka dynasty, the second son of the founder, and he was a great warrior. He won everywhere, and he made this Buddha image after he had come back from Thailand, and I think he was the one who destroyed Ayutthaya. So then he arranged it. But it is just opposite Prom, and at that time it was just nothing. No? But of course now the factory is functioning, and I've recently read somewhere in the internet that Burma has 50 or 60 other weapons factories. So they don't even need to import ammunition because they have enough in their own country. When the coup happened in March 1962, I was a hostel student in the university hostel with all women only, and it was locked after dark. And there was a roll call calling the names that all the women were there. And that's simply because they were all young unmarried women far from home. And if there's no security, the parents wouldn't allow them to stay there in case they would misbehave with some young man, you know. And it was locked. So in the morning, when this gate was opened and there was a compound, and there came a lady who sold some things, that means flowers and some snacks. But the flowers were two kinds. One to put in your hair, like roses or jasmine strands, and then some other larger flowers that were meant to be offered to Buddha. And you could also get the newspaper. So on one certain day in March, I saw the newspaper in English, The Guardian, and it was writing that the government had changed overnight. Oh, that's it. And there was one person killed, according to the papers. That was the young son of So Shwe Thai. And so that is the only thing we saw nothing about. No? And then, of course, when I had a problem later, I asked at the meditation center, I said, now we have a military government. And but then during UNU time, they had this movement to make Buddhist the state religion. No? And that also I asked, and apparently amongst the Burmese, it wasn't clear that this making Buddhist the state religion would create such problems with the Christian minorities. No? Simply because they were not educated enough to see the country as a whole. But I had a lot of doubts, even though I was favorable to meditation and very enthusiastic about Buddhism, and I became a Buddhist during that time also, about 1 year after meditation. So it would be in 1961. That was before the coup. But whether it should be the state religion, that's a different thing. So I didn't hear a single voice in Rangoon that it shouldn't be the state religion. So when the military took power, it was, of course, because they said it is because the minorities, starting with the Shan Sorbos, collected, and they wanted to break up the union because they had the clause in the constitution that they were permitted that after 10 years of independence. And then it would break up, and so the army had to step in. And that is why they took at that time, they took into prison most of the Shan Sorbas, I think almost all, and then all the members of parliament, without exception. So the last coup, they didn't take all. Okay, let's talk about those times. But the general trend in the country was, oh, well, if the lay government civilian government is so corrupt, and if they can't solve the problems of the countries because there are so many insurgents, then let's try, maybe they give a good government, because the government of the caretaker government was good. The soldiers were honest and well-meaning and not so corrupt as they became later. The corruption, I think, came in when they introduced the Burmese way to socialism, because that made everybody poor. And then you would try by hook and crook and so on. But in 62, it was different. It only came very gradually.
I do want to ask, you had mentioned before you took your first meditation course that before you found your interest in Buddhism, you said that you were starting to become really fascinated by Burmese society and people and getting really into it in ways that your family wasn't.
Well, I think simply I was young and it was something strange, and I had lots of time because I was in the phase where you get educated.
Mm-hmm.
No? My stepfather was also very interested in Burma, but he had to run his business. And then my mother had to do the household, and her profession is medicine. So then she started to treat patients.
And then after the 1962 coup, of course, Ne Win kicked out all kinds of foreigners that were there, foreign companies, foreign schools, missionaries, etc.
Yes.
What happened to you and your family?
Yeah, exactly. I would have had to leave the university in 1962 because the system was changed. It was at that time, and I got a scholarship from the Burmese government just before the coup. No, I applied for it under the UNU government, but the letter that it had been granted came under the military government. And because the military government had given me a scholarship to study Pali in Burma, they couldn't throw me out of the university.
I see, huh?
Normally, if I didn't get the scholarship, I would have to leave because all the others, even the people who were born in Burma but who had an Indian passport and were university students, they all had to leave. And all these shuns, and I knew quite a lot of shuns, particularly after becoming a hostel student. I had this friend who was a Korean. Her parents lived in Insane, but she was a hostel student, just my neighbor. Female, there were 3 female university hostels, Mala Hall and Thiri Hall, that were on near Prom Road, and the other one, Inya Hall, that was near Inya Road on the other side of the university compound. So my current friend was in Thiri Hall, and in the same hostel there was a Shan friend, and she was friendly with them. And so through this Shan friend, and in our hostel there were 2 girls, both of them from Taungji, and then remotely related, because if they are Sao, that means they are related to some Sopwa, then they are all intermarried, the 37 Shan principalities.
Right. So I just want to paint a picture for our audience to understand this context. It's 1962. You're halfway around the world living in Burma. It's just been taken over by a military dictatorship that is going to get more corrupt and more brutal as the years and decades go on.
My father worked for Fritz Werner, and he stayed for half a year, and he was successful. So then they gave him the normal contract, which lasts 3 years. That was not planned when we first came there. But they did more and more business, particularly after the coup. Fritz Werner did more business with the military than before.
What kind of business was that?
Well, the military started to throw out all the foreigners. That started with the Roman Catholic missionaries and nationalizing the schools, but they also threw out the British firms and any foreign firms.
Sure.
Or they forced them to make joint ventures with some Burmese people. And Fritz Werner was there and was making the contact between the Burmese side and the foreign firm that had to leave, and they got paid for that. So that's what my father did many times. I don't know, a certain percentage. But I don't know the details, which firm, but all these, Row and Company, where the foreigners bought their household goods. There's a shop in an apartment store in downtown Rangoon, not so far from Sula Pagoda Road, and other things. I mean, even BOC and all that. There were lots of British firms, and not all of them had to leave. And other firms, like, for instance, there was a Swedish match factory in Mandalay Later it became the father-in-law of my younger sister. But she met her husband at the age of 15 in Rangoon. And he was the same age at the same international school. So my father said to us privately, because even Nevin and Aungji, they came to our house sometimes. I have never met them because we were the children. I mean, these were important people, so we asked to keep out of sight. But my father later told me that only when Nevin put Aungji into prison, then he thought there's something fishy here.
Mm-hmm. So how long did your stepfather and your family stay after the coup?
About a year.
And how did your life change? How did the life of your family and your friends and yourself change after 1962?
I think not at all at the beginning. Because I went into this university hostel before the coup, and it was very difficult to get into it because it was over every room were 2 students, and the room was only 10 feet square, something like this. You can just put in 2 beds and then 2 small tables, and then there was a door and 2 small windows. So 3 people, it was actually impossible. You would have to have 2 cots for 3 to sleep in, and then very space. But I managed because I really wanted to leave home. I was very unhappy. It was too much trouble with my whole family being against the meditation, and I wasn't happy. And then U Ba Khin also said, well, you better stop meditation. That's too difficult. U Ba Khin came to visit us at this military compound. He really took trouble to get my father interested. He thought that he has the power on me. But my father was not responding at that time, but I think because he was just involved in managing his new situation. No? That is why even I was going to tell you that U Ba Khin bought the book Birds of Burma for my father, a very expensive present. Well, my father said, well, I went to town today to the so-and-so bookshop, I think Ava bookshop, that was the biggest bookshop on Sule Pagoda Road in that time. And there I met U Ba Khin, and that he came back. And then he said, I looked at the book Birds of Burma, because where we lived on Inya Lake, there were so many birds, and he liked to watch them in the morning after getting up from his window, and then they go swim in the lake, and only then they had breakfast. And then later, you know what U Ba Khin met after after my father had left the shop? Because my father said, well, this book is so expensive, I thought I shouldn't spend the money. And then U Ba Khin had seen that my father was interested in it and didn't buy it. And U Ba Khin went and bought it and made him a present of it.
That's so sweet.
And I still have the book now on my shelf. But of course, it came to me after my stepfather passed away. It went to my mother, and when my mother passed away, it came to me. And now I have the Birds of Burma that U Ba Khin donated present. And you must say that U Ba Khin was not a rich man. All his salary went to support his family. He didn't even handle it. He only handled the pocket money. That was an extra thing. Goenka has described that, how it was. And there's also a biography of U Ba Khin written by his son in Burmese, which I have, and I'm trying to translate it. But in the recent years, I didn't make progress. I got it in 2014 when it had newly appeared. It's now about 10 years. And there his son describes in detail how it was. So even the U Ba Khin's pocket money was managed by U Ba Po. So even though U Ba Khin was a layperson, but he didn't touch money, almost like a monk. And that was on purpose.
How did U Ba Khin's life change, if at all, after the 1962 coup? And what do you know about his relation with some of those leaders, Ne Win and U Nu and some of the others?
Of course, U Ba Khin had retired when he was 65 years old. But he was immediately re-employed. It was during the UNU era that his time, and he was immediately re-employed because he was capable, and he was given the task to look after some government departments that made a loss or were suspicious of corruption. So in his earlier years under the UNU government, he was in charge of the SAMB, which is selling the rice crop of the whole country, and he reformed it. Some of his close students were from that institute later, who became meditators. But then he also had a training institute for the people who were going to be auditors, because he was the accountant general. So there was a training institute for accountants. So some of his disciples, they went and took the courses not because they want to learn accountants, but because it was taught by U Ba Khin after they had done the meditation. So many of the disciples came to U Ba Khin actually through his work, because he was their boss. And the meditation center did not belong to U Ba Khin, or it was a private Buddhist association, Vipassana Research Association, belonging to the Accountant General Office of Burma. And that is a initiative that UNU instituted. He encouraged all the government offices to have Buddhist activities in their office prevalence as offices. So of this tendency, U Ba Khin took advantage, and he started in his office. And then they collected money. They were able to buy the land. It was in 1952. And then by the time I came there, it existed for 8 years. But the time Goenka came, of course, it was earlier. I think it was in 54 or 56. You have to look up Goenka's life story during the Sixth Buddhist Council.
Right.
Yeah, and Goenka was connected with the Sixth Buddhist Council, even though he was a Hindu, because it was a nationwide effort, and everyone in the whole country was concerned. And so even to have good connections to the UNU government, you had to join there. And he supplied the vegetarian food for the council people, because his group is very good at making vegetarian food, and the Burmese they are not so good in vegetarian. They eat vegetarian only when they are actually doing meditation, doing the course. Even U Ba Khin's center was not fully vegetarian. U Ba Khin and his close disciples, they ate meat when they were outside the course. Even in the center, chicken and fish and so on. Only they avoided the large animals. It's a kind of reduced meat intake that is avoiding the four-footed animals. No, but for us in Germany, it was quite weird when I started to become a vegetarian. Then my stepfather used to say, "What if you become a vegetarian? I can understand. What is this that you eat only this kind of meat and not that kind of meat?" But I did nothing. I liked the meditation, and I did everything that they did. So I didn't ask them for arguments, because I wanted to do that. I did simply through the meditation. Of course, it's not that I'm stupid, or I was actually quite a pious girl even from childhood, because my grandmother read the Bible every day. And I always got top grades in religious studies when I was in school in Germany. And even after confirmation, I served in the service. In the Christian group that my family belonged to after I was confirmed, they have the priest in the middle and two mess dinner. It's not Roman Catholic. It's a new group that was founded in the 1970s and influenced by the Rudolf Steiner's friends. My parents joined there when they were students, and then under Nazi it was not permitted. And so when it was revived, my family came to take this up again, and I happened to be confirmed at the age of 14 there. And I was baptized only at the age of 11, which I didn't know. I didn't know that I was not baptized, but I became a good Christian without baptism from childhood. And so religion was important to me. And that is why when I became a Buddhist at the age of 19, I didn't listen to my mother because she was not the authority. My religious authority was my grandmother, and she was safely far away in East Germany. And I never dare tell her that I changed to Buddhism.
So when you took that first course with U Ba Khin, I think you were 17, 18 years old. Did your Christian background come into conflict with what you were learning there?
Yes, it did. But simply that meditation is convincing.
So tell us about that first course and your first impression of Sayagyi U Ba Khin.
Well, of course, I met Sayagyi U Ba Khin when he invited us for this full moon celebration, where I went with my high-heeled shoes and my party dress. But it was actually nothing like a party. It was just under the moon near the pagoda, with the pagoda lighted and tables, and they served us mohinga. You know that mohinga is not vegetarian. It has fish in it. But it's a simple, traditional Burmese food, particularly in Rangoon. It's very favorite. And then there were some people coming to talk to us, and I remember two of them. They're both good in English, and one was Domya Sain, and the other one was Dosusu. And both were good meditators. And Domya Sain is a famous person also. She spoke to the British Parliament about Burmese independence in the 1930s when she was a student in London, Domya Sain. And she was a very close disciple of U Ba Khin, elderly lady. And we also met her at she was a retired professor of history from Rangoon University. And when we came there in the 1960s, my mother and me, we attended a class on Burmese history in the British America Institute, which was taught by Domya Sain. But I met her at the meditation center at that first occasion, and Tosusu I also remember.
And I should also just mention Domya Sain. Meditators in the tradition of SN Goenka will be familiar with her, not by name, but correct me if I'm wrong. She's the one who, during Goenka's first course, when it became too much for him and he wanted to run away and to leave, he famously tells this story in the 10-day discourse. She's the one who convinced him to stay. Is that not right?
Yeah. And she is also the one, her grandmother and her grandfather, they were the founding members of the first Buddhist missionary university to spread Buddhism to the West, headed by Ledi Sayadaw. That's her grandparents.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Can you say more about that?
Well, her grandfather was from Arakan, and he had a government position under the British during the colonial areas. You know that Arakan came under British rule much earlier than the rest of the country, just the coast, Arakan and Tenasserim. And then her mother is from Moulmein, which is nowadays Moulamein. But in Burma, in early days, the British spelled it Moulmein. But now it's spelled more like the Burmese pronunciation, which is Moulamein. And that is the Mon country, so she has Mon blood. Somebody called her a Mon princess, but that I think cannot be right because the Mon royalty was removed long ago and they were all dead.
And I think there's also this story about her that when she would travel in airplanes.
Yeah, she went into the unconditioned state. That is, of course, several of U Ba Khin disciples, actually not quite a lot of them, even though the courses were small, but the people who attained the unconditioned state were quite a good number. I have heard from a Goenka student, a German one, who had picked it up in India, that Goenka is supposed to have said U Ba Khin never taught a dry course, meaning if they reached the unconditioned state, they would not be dry. They would have a brief experience of nibbana, maybe just a moment. And that would ensure that they would make an end to suffering at some time. While the others will meet Arimathaya Buddha. The ones who do not experience this. I met Sayagyi U Ba Khin. For one thing, my stepfather highly recommended him, and he was very enthusiastic. That's why my mother also went along with that. And but my mother herself was not so interested in Buddhist meditation because she already was fairly fixed to her anthroposophical spiritual background. And she was not so deep into religion. She was more interested in earning in medicine and looking after her family. So when we were teenagers, we saw our mother only on weekends. She was always busy. Yeah. So in my case, I only thought this meditation must be wonderful because I had read a book by Rudolf Steiner on how do I get experience of higher worlds. That is a book about meditation, and it's actually not permitted for teenagers. But my mother had it, and it was in her bedroom, and it was locked, but I knew the key. And of course, I read everything I could get hold, so I also read that one. Well, so I must say I read it once, and now looking backwards, of course, much of it I don't remember, and some of it I was mostly mystified. But I was interested. It was strange. So I do know about meditation that it is getting you in touch with experience that you don't have as a normal human being. No? And it's in the higher worlds. That means God and heaven, of course. No? So that, of course, because I was so interested, I was pious. I mean, I seriously believed in Jesus Christ and that he can save me. And I thought that the baptism is important and all the sacraments are important. But I must say, I was 11 years when I received my baptism. And to my disappointment, I wasn't a saint after being baptized. I was more or less the same as I was before. Of course, the baby wouldn't know that. But I knew because I was already 11. We were baptized in West Germany. Because when I was born, that was not permitted by the government. This religion sect was prohibited by the Nazis. So my younger sisters, all of them were not baptized. And we were baptized as we grown up. And the same thing happened when I was confirmed. I was said, now I'm going to take the Holy Supper. When you get to the full-fledged Christian service. I still remember how we got to take the tram for 1 hour from our town to the place where the church was, and I was expecting that after the Holy Supper, now I would be saintly and I would be a good person and never do anything wrong. But it's lasted, say, about a month, and then afterwards I was more or less back to my moral behavior as it was before. So that one thing that interested me about the Buddhist meditation is after the meditation. But during the meditation, simply I had the feeling that I understand nothing about meditation, and this is a teacher, an expert, highly respected by my stepfather. And I don't know nothing, and he knows it. So I would do what he would tell me. I wouldn't enter into discussions with him. And he did not use the full formula that is now standard with Goenka, for instance, where you have to submit your life and so on and give it in the hands of the teacher. Even though that was part of U Ba Khin's system, but in the case of foreigners, he adapted. He was quite flexible. You see, I have read in a book about Goenka that even U Ba Khin permitted Goenka's family to take first Hindu meditation before they came to Buddhist meditation, which surprised me very much. But the others is simply that it doesn't fit into the ideal. Like, for instance, how can they say that he is the only disciple of Goenka? For a person who has been there and he knows that U Ba Khin appointed more than one a teacher to teach on his behalf. That's just wishful thinking. He must be maybe the most well-known one and the one who has taught more courses. Right. So the first course. So, of course, U Ba Khin started for authoritative but friendly, jovial. And my mother in the facility with the attached bathroom, which was set for both of us, but I stayed in the other one with the roof of leaves. We were given separate cells. My cell was the one on the left side of Mother Syama's cell. There were 8 cells upstairs. So the one was facing the Friedegard pagoda, that is where the Buddha image is. The one opposite is where Mother Syama normally meditated. Then on the side that is not towards the road, there were 3 more cells. So my cell was the one that was in the middle of these. Yes, so it was at the quarter. And the one between my cell and Mother Syama's cell, that is where my mother sat. Two cells. And of course, the inside is so that if U Ba Khin sits in the middle room, there is a door with Venetian blinds, and that can be closed and open. So he would, if he wants to interview the student while he's meditating, he would be in this shrine room and open that door. And otherwise, we would meet in the Dhammayon, the preaching hall, where there were no people except, for instance, at the time when we had our drink in the evening and so on. That would be a time where we can ask him questions. Yeah, and I remember my very first sitting, how he taught me Anapana. And he was busy, he taught me, and he said, you sit there, cross-legged, in a comfortable position, and then you watch your breathing. Breathing, watching. But nothing else, only watch. So then he went off, and he left because he went to office. And I started to sit in my cave and in that cell, and I said, that is how I practice Anapana in my first attempt. Then, after all, the door was opened. There was a woman there I didn't know, and she didn't speak any Burmese, any English, but she put her finger on her mouth, and then she had this hard breathing, and she shook her head and her hand. And then she repeated to make very soft breathing. And that was Mother Syama telling me that I was ventilating. When I didn't even know the word of ventilation. So then I continued in this quiet thing, and that was the first day. And I did this for several days. I think on day 4, the normal day, U Ba Khin gave me Vipassana. But I knew that he gave Vipassana to my mother later. And even before he gave it to her, he called 2 of us. And he said, well, I have already told you how to do the Vipassana meditation, but your mother's development is not so far gone yet. I want to teach her, but apparently there is some difficulty. And please explain to her how you practice Vipassana meditation. And we were standing under the Bodhi tree, our backs leaning on the little railing there, and U Ba Khin standing opposite. And I was sitting on this little wall that was there, and my mother also. And our 2 bare arms were matching because we were wearing short sleeve jackets. So my arm was touching my mother's arm. And my body, I felt anicca very strongly, all in my body, but particularly in the arms. They were like ants crawling. Well, of course, the teacher is close by, so his influence is also there. So I said to my mother, well, you do the Vipassana, anicca, but when you get this slight feeling, and then it becomes very prominent, like now. I said to her, because I could feel in my arm. And my mother had her arm, looked at me, and said, I feel nothing. Because it's her arm. No? So my arm, my mind, I could feel the change in the arm. But my mother wasn't that. So you can't transfer the feeling of anicca to another person. No? So she was eventually given it a little later. And I think that is, of course, my surmise. Her difficulty was that she was already influenced by the anthroposoph, and that's a different teaching, you see. So she had to practice a little more of concentration. And then I made good progress, and after the 10 days were over, U Ba Khin said, Well, if you stay a few days longer, maybe 3 or 4 days, next week we have a special holiday, and it will be very good for your meditation. You will profit very greatly. So then my mother said, "Oh no, but it is my husband's birthday. I want to be with him." And so she went back after 10 days. And I thought, well, my stepfather will have another birthday next year. So I think I will continue with my meditation and see what the teacher thinks I can achieve in the next 4 days. So I stayed on. And during these special days, I had this experience that they described. It was very brief, but it made a lot of difference. And it is so even that you cannot describe it, because it's very, you have to have a witness actually, and a person who can estimate what actually happens in the spiritual field. But Goenka tried to teach it at the beginning. I've heard that from other Indian disciples. And then he was instructed by the disciples of U Ba Khin, and maybe U Ba Khin himself, I don't know, not to do that in India, because the environment wasn't right. And so later on, he only talked about it very vaguely as the Nibbanic dip. And then sometimes in the long courses, he's teaching, now he said, Kalam Agameya, as you practice naturally, you'll sometimes have an experience like that. But in U Ba Khin's case, it was more different, because he, amongst the more important, the more advanced students, even in the 10-day courses, in every course there were a few, at least one or two or so.
So U Ba Khin would provide like specific guiding instructions in a case-by-case basis?
Yes, and also a protection in the mental field.
Right.
Yeah, and because his parami was to do that. But some disciples who have themselves great parami, they would go into it for long. So like Lomya Sain and like Ruth Dennison, when she reached that stage, she was in there, she writes in her diary, I was in that state for 1 hour, they told me, but for me it was just a moment. No? Now, of course, I can't talk about what Ruth Dennison experienced. I can only talk about what I myself experienced.
Sure.
No? So I had this very brief moment, and I don't remember about it, but it made a change. And they told me there are also side effects you can watch afterwards, and I had to be told to notice it.
That was your first course?
And that was my first course. But after, in the period, then I was alone, after my mother had already left. And then, I don't know, 1 or 2 days more, and then I went home.
So Sayagyi U Ba Khin had personally, after suggesting that you stay a few more days after the course, he had then given you personal instruction and guidance and protection on how to reach that state. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. And I do know that we had to have many trials, and then he told me a procedure, and then he said, okay, but it didn't work, and we had to repeat it. I can tell you the inner experience of the development of Vipassana. To go according to Visuddhimagga, U Ba Khin didn't teach that stage by stage, but he referred to it, because he often said, "What I teach is exactly in agreement with the Vipassana and with the Visuddhimagga," and you read it up when you first come to the stage of Vipassana. Now, what Goenka talks about is the stage of bhanga, that is free flow. When you can hear, you can feel your whole body, and it's all changing everywhere. So that is actually the stage of achievement that Goenka tries to lead his students to, because then they can fully understand that everything is impermanent and there. But it is not the end. I think in the according to Visuddhimagga is the stage number 3. I haven't got the thing by heart, no. And beyond that, you have to go, and it becomes it becomes very hot. Some describe it as if they were in an oven of fire, and then all of a sudden they were out of it, very intense. But then beyond that, it fades also. It gets lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter, and your body, you are still a human being, but sort of your body feels very light. And in that case, you have to be protected from outside influences, because anyone who can, who is not meditating, or even a good meditator who is not taking a course and he is staying outside and he comes from the center and he reaches, he speaks to someone who's been there for a month, there's an interaction. Mm-hmm. No, and I remember we did one session during that period. I think not during the event itself, but when there were several people sitting in the caves and all the doors were open. U Ba Khin was in the middle, and there was someone who could watch and see that. And then they saw that I was more pure than the others, even though the others had more experience, because they had not recently taken a course.
And what do you mean they saw? How did they see that?
Mother Sayama can see it. I don't know what they see.
Maybe so this is Mother Sayama who's looking.
Mostly. But she was not the only one who could see it. I cannot see. I can only feel. Mm-hmm. And I think U Ba Khin himself mostly went by feeling.
Mm-hmm. So there was a sense, either from U Ba Khin or Mother Sayama or some other developed practitioner, there was a sense that of purity and proximity to the state that was heightened enough that it brought U Ba Khin into your cell to deliver the specialized guidance. Is that what happened?
Yeah, I think that he was able to connect to the story, to the store of parami he has developed in the upper worlds, his own parami. If he concentrated, and then he was able to develop it, to contact it, and then distribute it. He would sit in the middle, and we would sit in our own cells. There was no physical contact. There was a distance. No?
And he would give the guidance and protection.
Yes.
And in terms of time, I'm just curious, are we looking at like approximately like an hour a day of this guidance, or like 5 hours at a time, or 5 minutes? What are we talking about in terms of the specialized instruction? How long it would take for, because obviously the inner experience of the meditation is different than how time works in the real world. So what kind of time was U Ba Khin giving for giving that specialized instruction?
Well, the procedures approaching it were very strict. Sometimes you had to take your food inside the cell even. And because even if you move inside the meditation center, there might be some influence from the outside, even inside the meditation center.
So you'd be in your cell all day?
No, not really, but a certain time. The thing itself that he attended as a ceremony would not take long. It would be maybe less than half an hour.
Less than half an hour in a single day of specialized instruction and protection.
Yeah, maybe even shorter. Of course, if the disciple experiences for 1 hour, definitely that would be altogether 1.5 hours. No?
And how would he know how the practitioner was responding to his guidance? Would the practitioner be speaking and describing what they were experienced, or would U Ba Khin be sensing on a deeper level?
He would sense at a deeper level. There is the diary of Mr. Hislop, which has been printed by the disciples of Mother Sayama, where Hislop describes how U Ba Khin performed the ceremony with Hislop several times, and it failed. He never achieved that state. But he describes it, what his experience was, Hislop. And that Hislop said at the moment when U Ba Khin told him to concentrate at the heart center and let go of attachment, then instead of this, he felt something on his head and he stroked his head. Then U Ba Khin said, well, okay, let's start again. And then another occasion, this kind of thing. I don't know, this is quite an interesting account, but to understand it fully, you must understand what actually happened. And this is nothing that any Goenka student would understand, because Goenka didn't do that.
It didn't give specialized instruction, you mean?
No, at least not up to, I've done only the 45 courses, but I think the whole tendency, he was told not to do that.
Told by U Ba Khin?
Yeah.
Why did U Ba Khin tell him that?
because Goenka's parami is different from U Ba Khin's.
Right.
Goenka's parami is to teach lots of people, but at a lower level. He taught many people that U Ba Khin would refuse. I mean, look at courses 500 and then 3 courses a month. And the spiritual power that Goenka builds up, like for instance, when I was in Damagiri, I stayed a few months, and then there was Goenka's self course. Actually, that was the course where he himself has to meditate. But then there were many witnesses, so it was a whole group. And nowadays it is more for intellectual curiosity, because it's not being practiced except by people who are practicing themselves. I mean, because definitely there are personalities like Vibhu Sayadaw who achieve high states of development without any involvement of either U Ba Khin or Goenka. And I don't want to say that all the other meditation masters don't have achievements. No, it's just different. And I can only talk about this tradition. So with all the interest but it is not for the general public, really. No, because the Vinaya rule is the monks should not talk about it. They should talk only when they are about death, and other monks ask them, "Did you achieve anything?" Then they can speak. So U Ba Khin even told all of us not to talk about meditation to non-meditators at all. No, we've gone far away from that. But here I have to be careful also to whom I speak, because if there's somebody who just has a very little low opinion of me, he will just laugh, or he will think badly, or think I'm imagining this and that.
So this is such a delicate topic, and so amazing to hear from you as well. And yet I know that we've already gone over our scheduled time. I know that we're running over into your meditation time. So I want to pause here so that you can get to your own practice, and we'll pick this up in a future conversation. This has been so delightful to have this first session and conversation with you, and I look forward to many more. Thank you so much for spending this time.
Okay. Well, in my case, of course, I'm only one of quite a number of people, and the achievement is very little compared to what the real developed people achieved under U Ba Khin's guidance. So okay, enough.
So now that we've just heard this first interview, Joa, let's have a little conversation. I can ask you some questions about the interview.
Yeah.
So what, after hearing, again, I'm sure you've listened to this first interview many times, listened to the interview, read the transcript, and there's always something new that emerges. And so I'm just curious, what was the most surprising thing that you learned while conducting the interview? Were there any unexpected revelations or impressions or insights that really stood out for you?
I think every time I listened to this interview, something new did stand out. If you're asking the question, what stood out the first time, I was fervently trying to remember what was in this particular interview and what were the 5 incredible insights and stories that happened in this number one, and not confusing them with others. If I remember correctly, I know the first kind of amazing anecdote that stands in the mind that I've just gone back and listened to this so many times over because it's so lovely is she's, I think one of the things we also have to say is that she's in addition to all those incredible accolades that we've already given her, like she's also really funny. We have to remember that in addition to all the wonderful and amazing and important insights and stories that she tells, she also, her sense of humor is it gets you every time. The way that she's able to put that humor in those real life situations. And I'm saying that because I'm referencing her first visit to IMC, of course, where there's a full moon, as she remembers, at a full moon party. And so she wears this, she's 17 years old, she wears this Western gown. You just have this image of this this young adolescent girl, first time in the tropics, hearing about a full moon in Rangoon under the pagoda, and going in this Western gown and not realizing the religious and meditative aspects of what the experience was. And that's just, I think that's a bit of a preview of what an honest narrator she comes across as, and as you go this journey with her, you feel like you're watching over her shoulder a girl who sometimes has good intentions but is a bit naive and clumsy in how she's trying to fulfill them, and missing certain cultural cues, but then trying to learn and do her best and navigate as she moves on. It's just a tremendous objective feeling of who this person is and how she's telling the story. And that's just part of it, that her introduction to meditation comes in the form of, before her first course, of course, but it comes in wearing the wrong clothes and going with the wrong intention to what's essentially a religious and kind of meditative festival. And just the imagery that you get in your mind as she's telling this yarn is wonderful. And I think this is also the episode where she talks about the Birds of Burma book. And that just melted my heart, it just melted my heart just hearing this. And I think this is the first moment where someone, as someone who began meditation in the SN Goenka Vipassana tradition, U Ba Khin is just a figure held in reverence, and in that reverence, there sometimes isn't an accounting for the full dimensional aspect of who this person is in flesh and blood. And to hear a story where he watches a close friend look at a book that he really wants to buy, but he can't because he doesn't have enough money, and then he goes back to the bookshop to buy that book, gift it to his friend, who then cherishes it all his days of Burma, sits on his veranda looking at this picture book and trying to match him to the birds. And then to cap it off, Friedgard says, and that book is right behind me. I'm someone who I like the physical. I like touching something and thinking, who has touched this before me, and where is this physical thing actually been in the world? And to think that this book behind her is the very book that Sayagyi U Ba Khin, as a person, not a revered meditation teacher, but as a person, as a friend, as someone in the world, saw this book and went to buy it and gave it to his friend, who then cherished it, and then Friedgard has it. That was also kind of a first indication that we're going to be treated to a different version of these familiar characters, familiar to some of us. We're going to be treated to a different version of them than the usual stories that maybe we've heard so many times over.
Yeah, for me too, I really appreciated how she humanizes Sayagyi U Ba Khin, because many of us who practice in the Goenka tradition, we have U Ba Khin on this very high pedestal, and only see him in a very particular light. And no, I don't want to say she takes him off the pedestal. She's not doing that, but she certainly humanizes him and talks about him as if he was, this really kind and wise, either big brother or even parental figure. But in the many interviews and her stories of him, she really makes him out to be just a human being, a superb human being, but a human being. Yeah. Nevertheless. And also it touched me, her sort of cultural faux pas. Yeah. When she arrives at the center in the dress or in the high heels. Or there's another instance, it's not in this episode, but when she talks about when U Ba Khin and some of his friends or disciples show up at her house, and they're all in their bathing suits and try to get them to go swimming with them. So another cultural faux pas, but it doesn't seem as if there was a lot of shame or judgment. They make these cultural errors, but they're easily forgiven. And even after Friedgard goes to the center to this party and she's misdressed and maybe she's saying the wrong things and not understanding the language, she is still nevertheless welcomed to come for a course. And we have to understand at the time, I don't know how easy it was to get into these courses. It seemed, especially at that time, that most of the students who were going were the elites of Burmese society, whether in the realm of politics or business, or maybe, a small number of foreigners. Yet she was allowed to go, and it reveals also her spontaneity and adventure. So she quickly realized that she was wearing the wrong clothing, but rather than being embarrassed, she still went for a course, the following course, and went along with her mother. And when they were given the choicest of accommodation, with a private bedroom and attached bathroom, she insisted on taking the simplest accommodation. She keeps referring it to like the hut or the cottage with the leaves on the roof. And in that room, she slept on the floor. And in a way, she's developing her parami of renunciation, although she didn't actually have the language yet for what she was doing, but it's there. And so I really appreciated that story as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that another thing that struck me as I was listening to this, I don't know how many times it's been, but I listened before this conversation. It's kind of like watching your favorite movie or TV show again, and kind of getting excited for all the scenes you remember, and then hearing new things or new connections you didn't quite know before, and even some foreshadowing of knowing what's coming down the line. I think that one of the things that struck me, not a new insight, but something I just appreciated yet again in hearing this, is just the extraordinary fluidity of how she's able to move, to progress throughout these stories that hit every mark. As she's talking about leaving Germany and the actual travels to Burma, and then suddenly she's subjectively inside a 17-year-old head of describing what it was like to step on the ground in Rangoon, and what she thought it would be like and what it actually was. And then she's giving some historical lessons and telling us what Burma was at that time, and even going into some Burmese history and talking about her family relations and her home life, and going to university study and family. And then seamlessly, it's going back and forth between the world of meditation and Sayagyi U Ba Khin and IMC, and getting into pretty dense meditation theory and technique and practice and attainments and instructions in the middle of all this, just flowing into that, and then flowing back out into her relations with her parents and her family again, and going to school, and the classmates that she's meeting, and her memory of those classmates, the earrings that they wore, and the things they did together. And so it's something that I really encourage listeners, if you find this interesting, it's worth the time to go back and listen again, a second or third time. I've spoken to so many guests on this platform, and I've never spoken to someone who's so layered in how she talks, that it's so dense. There's so much material in such a short period of time, that even as you're listening as carefully as you can, you're just not quite catching all of the details that her mind is able to hit upon and to capture and to put out there for us to grab onto. And sometimes the details are so fantastic and extraordinary, and sometimes so deep, that you find yourself reflecting on a story or a detail, and then 5 minutes go by and you realize you haven't quite been listening to that, because you've just been so caught on what she said 5 minutes ago. And you can imagine me as an interviewer when I'm doing this in real time, and she's throwing layer upon layer upon layer in a period of 5 or 10 minutes, and I'm trying to listen. I'm trying to appreciate the new layers that are coming, when my mind is reeling from something I just heard 5 minutes ago, and then I'm trying to figure out what question to ask her next to keep on. I've often said, sitting from the host chair, Friedgard is probably one of the most challenging set of interviews I've ever done, because there's so much layer in these talks, and you're trying to get the most out of the time that you have. the amount of processing that has to be done in real time, let alone, you know, all of the re-listens you could have later when you're not an active participant, you're just passively listening. The possibility and the potentiality of how you can respond in the moment is so infinite, and you're always afraid you're missing something that's right there. And how many times did I listen on a re-listen? Did I hear something I'd never heard in real time? Or someone would say to me, I was so amazed when she said this. And I said, really? She said that? I didn't even notice it. And of course, you know this, Corey, because we would have extensive conversations during these sessions where I would kind of nerd out technically with you and trying to tell you my struggles with figuring out, you know, how I have these real-time conversations, because the level of processing and the layers were just so much to take on in real time, and to feel that I wasn't, of course I'm not going to get everything, but just to try to figure out how do I do my very best to hear as much as I can as we're going, while also be present and responsive as this conversation partner.
Absolutely. Interviewing such a complex being, such a complex 82-year-old being such as Friedgard, requires almost two different mindsets. On the one hand, you're trying to, as you said, you're trying to make sense of everything. You're trying to gather as much data as possible, which will later be used for interpretation and analysis and understanding. And that can get really overwhelming, especially in the moment. And then the other approach when confronting such a person is to just sort of sit back and let go and let the experience unfold as it does. So there's always this tension between trying to control and trying to needing to let go. And I feel that's based on our conversations. That was a tension that you often worked with. Yeah. So I'm curious, when we look at somebody like Friedgard, she had this very unique German, intellectual, artistic, very Christian, but also theosophically influenced background. How do you think these different factors shaped her attraction to meditation and to U Ba Khin?
Wow, what a question. You know, I think the immediate answer I would give is just paramis, is just that. And for those who don't know that Buddhist word, paramis, it's, I guess, a simple way we can describe that as a kind of spiritual potentiality. Someone with paramis with high paramis would be naturally attracted to spiritual teachings, to liberation from suffering, to renunciation from worldly pleasures, and committing to walk on this noble path. And I think that anyone who takes steps towards this practice of meditation, I think, is a sign of some parami they've had that is bringing them towards wanting to, in this life, wanting to learn this practice and to involve oneself in it. And I think that the paramis that Friedgard must have had to have found herself in, you know, first of all, to have found herself in this extraordinary situation, and then to make the most of it, you know, beyond the most of it. I think it's all a testament to just to a combination. I don't want to be deterministic or fatalistic that she just had to sit back and let her paramis run the show. I think she, her resilience and her hard work really shine through all these interviews. But, you know, hard work and resilience aren't enough. You have to, whether people call it luck or fate or destiny or, as we're saying, paramis, I think you have to have something that is going beyond the hard work and the resilience, and is attracting and bringing you on these deeper levels. And interestingly, Friedgard said that Sayagyi U Ba Khin told her, you have a very special parami, and it will mature later in life. And she never knew what that was. And I started to suspect, and I even suggested this to her on some occasions, do you think your parami is that your story of your experiences will one day be told to the world, and it won't be lost. That what happened to you and what you witnessed and what you knew that isn't known to the world. These figures, these happenings, this history, these stories, these persons. That your special parami is that you are going to be the messenger that is going to keep this alive. And that's I'm getting a bit off track, and I'll come back to what you asked. But that's another thing that's been on my mind. Is that another thing that's so remarkable about her story is it's not theory, it's not opinion, it's not hearsay, it's not what we think may have happened or how we hear one-dimensional stories or this mythology and want to construct our own narratives out of them. This is a real person who is living in a real time and is telling us what actually happened. It's not a theory, it's a fact. And sure, one can debate the veracity of her memory, and I'm sure that as memory is, there with her as well, there can be bias, and you can remember things differently. One can go there, but that aside, she's recounting actual experiences with meditation instructions heard by these revered teachers, and so. This is an actual thing that we're interacting with, not a theory or a memory of a memory or a story that someone else told. And again, to say again, these are not brief encounters that she was having. These were extended periods of years upon years with these figures in their own languages. And as you say, a German intellectual and someone coming from an intellectual objective tradition, to bring that mindset and that sharpness into this context where she's interacting on local levels, living in the grass huts and speaking the language, wearing the dress, as she says in one interview. At one point, she had to her Burmese dress had a tear, and her mother started to stitch it. And she stopped her mother because her mother was using German thread and said, "I don't want even a stitch of fabric in this dress that's not Burmese. I want every fabric of it, every thread to be Burmese and Burmese only." So to come from that background and that intellectual tradition, and to then live for so many years with these great masters and respecting these local traditions in these profound ways. Not a hippie who was traveling in India and happened to learn something for a matter of months or even over the course of a couple years. But again, this sustained experience in a Burmese Buddhist environment with these teachers is astounding. And so I think, going back to your question, I think that the part of her paramis is a big part of that answer, is that this intangible, immeasurable aspect of attraction to these concepts and this practice. But I think it also gets at how unique her telling of this is, because she was able to alternate between these worlds. She was able, just as with 7 years in Tibet, she's the main character, the Austrian. He doesn't become Tibetan. Friedgard doesn't become Burmese. But when you're spending this much time in the language, the dress, the customs, the religion, the meditation, the practice, the environment, the food, etc., when all of that is being consumed and practiced at local levels, and practiced that way for such extended periods, but yet the mind that has come into that environment is coming from different traditions, different understandings, different perspectives. You then have someone who can inhabit these two worlds in astounding ways, and being able to bring the reality of this Burmese Buddhist experience in ways that probably most Burmese Buddhists couldn't do, because they're from that environment. They're from that tradition. They always say, if you want to know what culture is, it's like asking a fish to explain the water. The fish can't explain water because it's what it's around all the time. So Friedgard, with her extremely observant mind, who's integrating into these local environments so masterfully, is able to understand and explain these environments in such remarkable ways, and float between, the different communities and ways of thinking to give us the explanation that we end up with.
You mentioned parami here, and we do, for most listeners might know that there are 10 paramis, and there's two that we really see stick out based on what you said. There's the parami of truth, satya, and so here we see we hear her speaking the truth of her experience, her observations, what she saw, what she heard, what she felt. So that's really interesting. But this hard work and resilience and determination, this is also another parami, the parami of adittan. And one thing that really exemplified this for me is when she shared how she learned Burmese, not so much because she wanted to learn more about Burmese culture, but she really wanted to know what U Ba Khin was teaching to others. And I found that fascinating, when somebody will learn a language just to understand the words of one person in particular. So, I said that she had really humanized U Ba Khin, but at the same time, she really did idolize him. So we did hear a lot about her first course at the International Meditation Center. Do you want to share what you made of her description of this first course, and also of the way U Ba Khin facilitated his courses?
Yeah, I think again, you have this this navigation through everything from the physical environment to the teachers to the food to the meditation experience, the technical instructions, the inner reality, and how the teachers were working with that inner reality. You have all of this together in one package, which as a listener almost makes you feel like a traveler, that you can travel through different parts of what she's telling and determine where you want to explore and where you want to rest and where you want to reflect. And also this interaction between the foreigners and the Burmese who are running it, and very few foreigners pass through there. I think it's remarkable hearing her experience with her mother and going with her mother, and she and her mother's different experience in going through the meditation. And then, of course, it's I think for an insider who practices meditation and knows these figures, I think things just kind of pop out in startling ways that, if I remember correctly, because all these 35 hours run together, but if I remember correctly, it's Mother Sayama that is guiding her through Anapana. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not clear whether she was guiding her or she was correcting her, because it seemed that U Ba Khin would give private instruction, personal instruction, and special protection to each student, unlike what we're used to in the Goenka centers, where there's, U Ba Khin had instructed Goenkaji to teach large numbers of people, even people who U Ba Khin himself had refused. So in this environment of impersonal instruction, from what I remember, U Ba Khin gave her very basic Anapana instruction and then left the center and went to work. And she was in her cell, and maybe she didn't understand the instruction, or maybe something was going on, but she was breathing very hard, almost as if she was ventilating. And she was in the cell just next to Mother Sayama's. So Mother Sayama came out of her cell and knocked on the door of Friedgard's cell, and using sign language, because Sayama didn't speak English, was getting her to breathe gently, to breathe calmly, rather than deep, long, hard breaths. And so that was, we can say, maybe maybe U Ba Khin was the first teacher, and Sayama was like maybe her first tutor.
I think so. Yeah, I think that's correct. And I think for a meditator in this tradition who knows these names, to just kind of in the middle of a story, out of nowhere seemingly, Mother Sayama walks into a room and starts demonstrating how to do the Anapana correctly. It's just kind of like, whoa, what, turn left, you see this person, turn right, you see this person, and then have this conversation. And then I believe it was also this first episode where she talks about her friendship with the woman that Goenka tells in his story on the 10-day discourses, that when Goenka wanted to leave the course because it was too difficult, this woman convinced him to stay. And just another kind of figure in there. And this also happened to be the figure that can an anecdote about her was that she was able to go into the unconditioned state when she was in airplanes. Just these phantasmical stories that are coming seemingly out of nowhere from names that are recognizable, but as you've said, not humanized because those details haven't been there before. And Friedgard is the protagonist in this narrative going forward that is revolving around this young, in her own self-described terms, somewhat naive, well-intentioned, young adolescent Westerner who is at the middle of this astounding narrative and giving us these descriptions of these amazing events and people and stories and, kind of personalities and sides of them. And that leads us to this particular meditation course where it culminates in, again, as I remember correctly, with in this particular episode, that she is, that there's a sense that she's making some serious progress at the end of the course, and U Ba Khin comes to give her some specialized instructions unique to her, to where she's at in the meditation, to be able to progress profoundly, which of course is something that I think as meditators in the Goenka tradition, we hear about these stories happening at IMC. There's the story that there was never a dry course at IMC. They're very different from how we experience the 10-day courses or even long courses in the Goenka centers today. And so to hear about how these courses progressed and how different teachers were interacting with students and giving instructions in certain ways, to have it unfold in the course of a story, not just a single anecdote. That's what I'm trying to get at. Not just I think there are anecdotes that have survived outside of Friedgard of particular profound moments where someone has written a letter or a journal entry that is told of something profound. But this is altogether different of hearing someone in their own words describe the experience of a course unfolding gradually, and you're moving from grass huts to the food, to the possibility of real attainment. And so you can really feel what it must have been like to be on that course when all the surroundings that are happening and the one day after the other unfolding, and then this experience happening. So it's very much situated into something physical and real, rather than just a kind of a marvelous anecdote that's there floating that feels kind of, or to me has felt less connected and more kind of questions around what it meant and what happened than hearing Friedgard's story at the end of the course told in the context of the entire course experience and relations with those teachers.
Yeah, I think this is the power of her skill in telling stories. She's not just sharing a story of some far off place, but she's actually bringing you there with her. So you're sitting in the meditation hall or the preaching hall while U Ba Khin is giving a discourse and answering questions, or you're sitting in the cell just next to her, breathing heavily as, Mother Sayama, exits her meditative state to come and nudge you along with her. And so you really feel as if you're part of the story. And for me, that's really the sign of a great storyteller. And maybe it's because I've listened to these and I've read a lot about this history and I've read a lot about these characters. But these characters are always from a very descriptive perspective. So it's really nice to hear her talking about them from an experiential perspective, not just really from this first person perspective. And then maybe because these characters have been in my mind for so long, I feel like I'm right there next to her. Yeah. So that's one thing that I really felt after this first episode. In fact, all the episodes, but really after this first episode. I'm just curious, how do you feel coming out of that first episode back then? After you conducted that first interview, do you recall how you felt?
Yeah, I would wager that my feeling at the time was one of tremendous appreciation of a certain kind of treasure that I had happened to capture, like amber, that was frozen, that would be preserved in this world at some moment, which happens to be this moment that anyone is listening to it. And I think I felt anxious because I knew how much more there was left to uncover and left to discuss, and not know how long that faucet would stay on. And this wasn't just a health matter, it was also a matter of her willingness and trust going forward, and what she would tell in her time away in meditation. There was actually quite a degree of anxiety for the first, I would say, 5 to 7 episodes, because I knew that it could stop at any moment for any reason, and I knew how much there was to catalog, and it took a number of hours until I started to feel that even though I was greedy, which is the other emotion to put out there, greedy to want to just keep freezing more moments in amber, because every one of them, this is I should explain and unpack this. She is telling knowledge and information and experiences that are wholly unavailable anywhere else. What she doesn't tell will never be known to the world. It will. I think it would be safe to say that these would be stories or insights or reflections that simply will not come to us ever again. And so honestly speaking, there was a bit of anxiety and responsibility in feeling and navigating this comfort as a conversation partner, and flowing and the rapport with this responsibility to want to bring out this information and preserve it and keep it and have it safe in the world, that if it didn't come from her, it just simply might not come, and people would be left to their own mythology and assumptions and magical thinking, and however one wanted to think, rather than some verified source that was that had lived through this and was telling us a real version of what she remembered and witnessed. And so after this first episode, I did feel that mix of tremendous appreciation, warmth, chuckling at some of these incredible stories, feeling affection and melting at some of the other kinds of things that she would say, and then feeling anxiety of, it's probably as soon as this recording logged off and we were just talking offline before we ended the call, I'm sure the first thing I said was, so what's the next time? What's the next appointment that we have to meet? Just feeling this this mix of what it was like to be next to someone of that stature who had lived this life and who was trusting me with this story and trying to bring this story out.
It sounds like you had a lot of weight to carry this almost sacred duty or responsibility to share Friedgard's rich history with the world.
I think so. And I think that, just as I started to feel that this special parami that U Ba Khin had referenced that Friedgard had was the special parami that she would be the last surviving messenger of a lost time that no one else had access to and no one ever would again after her. Just as she was charged with this, some of the people that were close to me started to wonder if part of my mission in life was to be her medium. And if so, that's an extraordinary, humbling and privileged role to be worthy of possessing in this life, that I was there to play some role in gaining her trust and doing right by her and being this conversation partner to engage and ask the right questions to both in the meditation sphere and the Burma sphere, to be able to get out this information in the proper and compelling way. So it was very much a sacred duty of a kind that, again, we've had over 300 guests on this platform, and they've all been marvelous and important, wonderful conversations I've had with those guests that have changed my life, that have made me cry, things that have been said that I've never forgotten, that I quote, every other week, that have been so powerful. And yet there was a nature of a sacred duty with Friedgard that came before we actually had the chance of having the conversation, and then occurred over the duration of our talk, that I've just never felt anything that can be comparable to any other conversation I've had with any other guest.
Wow. Well said. Well said. Well said. I think this is a good place to close this conversation. And I really look forward to hearing the next episode and seeing what comes out of that.
Thank you. And I really thank you for stepping in and taking this hosting role and being there to prompt me. I knew I didn't quite have it in me to prompt myself on my experience being with her, and I really appreciate you taking that other side of the host chair.
Yeah, my pleasure. And again, thank you for asking me. It was a real privilege and honor to be here with you to kick off this series.
We'd like to take this time to thank our generous supporters who have already given. We simply could not continue to provide you with this content and information without the wonderful support of generous donors, listeners, and friends like you. Each episode helps in providing access to one more voice, one more perspective, one more insight. Every donation of any size is greatly appreciated and helps us continue this mission. We greatly appreciate your generosity, which allows us to maintain this platform. Thank you. If you would like to join in our mission to support those in Myanmar who are being impacted by the military coup, we welcome your contribution in any form, currency, or transfer method. Your donation will go on to support a wide range of humanitarian and media missions, aiding those local communities who need it most. Donations are directed to such causes as the Civil Disobedience Movement, CDM, families of deceased victims, internally displaced person IDP camps, food for impoverished communities, military defection campaigns, undercover journalists, refugee camps, monasteries and nunneries, education initiatives, the purchasing of protective equipment and medical supplies, COVID relief, and more. We also make sure that our donation fund supports a diverse range of religious and ethnic groups across the country. We invite you to visit our website to learn more about past projects as well as upcoming needs. You can give a general donation or earmark your contribution to a specific activity or project you would like to support, perhaps even something you heard about in this very episode. All of this humanitarian work is carried out by our nonprofit mission, Better Burma. Any donation you give on our Insight Myanmar website is directed towards this fund. Alternatively, you can also visit the Better Burma website, betterburma.org, and donate directly there. In either case, your donation goes to the same cause in both websites except credit card. You can also give via PayPal by going to paypal.me/betterburma. Additionally, we can take donations through Patreon, Venmo, GoFundMe, and Cash App. Simply search Better Burma on each platform and you'll find our account. You can also visit either website for specific links to these respective accounts or email us at info@betterburma.org. That's Better Burma, one word, spelled BETTERBURMA.org. If you would like to give in another way, please contact us. We also invite you to check out our range of handicrafts that are sourced from vulnerable artisan communities across Myanmar, available at alokacrafts.com. Any purchase will not only support these artisan communities, but also our nonprofit's wider mission. That's Aloka Crafts, spelled ALOKACRAFTS, one word, alokacrafts.com. Thank you so much for your kind consideration and support.